think that the actual debate or the question and answer session is actually going to be very important. All issues are not going to be touched on. I'm going to try to address some key arguments. I hope that we can have discussion afterwards that will go back and recuperate some of the things that might have been overlooked. I'm going to start with the idea, with just an overview, the idea that Mali, since its independence in 1960, has known a series of rebellions in the north, the most notable being 1963, 1964, but as recently as 2006 and then 2007 through 2009. Those revolts have been led mostly by Tuareg-speaking people of the Keladar, of the far northeastern region of Mali, in what is the region of Kidal, in this map here. The uneven integration of northern Mali into the rest of the Malian nation state, as well as key social tensions within Tuareg society and within the Keladar society specifically, have produced political conflicts over the decades that have become effectively recurrent at this point, in which the Malian state has not been able to fully address or has not been able to fully live up to the kinds of commitments it might have made on signing various peace accords over time. So there's a long set of long-standing grievances among the Tuareg population. I signal that those are often taken out of context and inflated in the foreign media. I signal also that very frequently the MNLA, which is the Mouvement National pour la Libération de l'Azawad, which is the National Movement for the Liberation of the Azawad, has a very effective kind of PR wing, and so many things are circulated by the MNLA. The Malian government apparently does not have a PR wing, although you think the Ministry of Foreign Affairs would do some of that work. I don't seem to do so. So, what has changed recently? So you can say, okay, there's a series of problems over time. What has changed recently? What has changed recently is first the presence. What has changed recently is the presence of a long-standing insurgency, Algerian in its origins, from the 1990s, which began as part of the Algerian Civil War in the 1990s, become rooted in northern Mali, where it has found sanctuary and haven over the last several years, and since the last 5 years has taken the name of Al-Qaeda Islamic Maghreb, which I'll refer to as AQMI, referred to as AQIM or AQMI, AQMI. So AQMI has been present in northern Mali for some time now. There have been also splits within the movement of, let me just back up on that. AQMI has been present in northern Mali for some time now. It has been increasingly involved since 2007 with the emergent narco-trafficking economy in northern Mali, by which there are two main vectors to feed that economy. One is the transshipment of cocaine from Latin America that passes through West African ports and is shipped through Malian territory up through Algeria or previously Libya and into European markets. The other vector, which is less important and less novel, is cannabis and cannabis resin, which moves from west to east, generated in Morocco, ending up in the Middle East by and large. That is less profitable, but still important as a significant kind of strand of criminality. Income generated by cocaine trafficking and cannabis trafficking has been important to smugglers for some time. Cocaine much more recently. With cocaine, of course, it's very hard to measure the actual volumes being moved. It has been in the hundreds of millions of dollars in recent years. Even a small level of taxation on such a large sum would be very profitable. More profitable for Al-Qaeda and Islamic Maghreb over the last decade has been the ransoming of European hostages, which has netted in the tens of millions of euros. The figures are very difficult to ascertain because European governments don't like to say how much they pay for ransoms, but the estimated rough price of a European hostage is somewhere between $2.5 and $4 million. Americans don't seem to be taking hostages either because they're not present or because the government doesn't pay ransoms, but that could change. So there's been these two competing, not necessarily competing, but these two criminal activities have been fairly deeply rooted in the Sahara, become fairly deeply rooted very quickly over the last few years. And have drawn the attention of the United States and others, but they also coincide with longer-running tensions within Tuareg society around the unrealized process of decentralization from the central government in Bamako and the reclamation of, or the claiming of increased resources in the north itself. There's been a great deal of state weakness in Bamako over the last several years. In the last months of the regime of Amadou Touré, who was overthrown in the coup d'etat in March, were seen as being effectively rudderless or without aim. And it was widely held by many observers from the outside that there was a kind of modus vivendi that had been produced between the Malian government in Bamako, some of its key military officers in northern Mali, Arabs, Tuareg, and others, and the narco-trafficking networks, which include some elements of Al-Qaeda Islamic program. Moreover, the Malian government has consistently refused to cooperate with its partners in acting to diminish the capacity of Al-Qaeda Islamic Maghreb to take and hold hostages on Malian territory. And it's been argued without, of course, conclusive proof that there was some kind of laissez-faire policy adopted towards Al-Qaeda Islamic Maghreb. This might also have been produced by an awareness on the part of the Malian government of the relative weakness to actually control the vast expanses of the northern Sahara. All these factors, which I'm moving over very quickly, will return to, only need to be signaled here. There are other interests at stake as well. Let me give something of a timeline of the last few months, just to serve as something of a reminder. In late 2011, the Tuareg nationalist movement announced itself, which at the time was the MNA, then changed its name to MNLA, and that's the acronym by which I'll refer to it, the National Movement for Liberation of the Azawad, declared engaged in war with the Malian army in the north beginning in January of 2012, and won a series of victories in the north, sparked partly by these military victories, but catalyzed partly by the return of arms and men from the Libyan collapse. Over the years, many of Muammar Gaddafi's security forces had been staffed by Tuareg officers and Tuareg fighters. Some of them had taken Libyan nationality, some of them had been present in Libyan territory for decades, and when they saw the handwriting on the wall from Muammar Gaddafi, many of them returned in arms to Mali. They also attempted to return in arms to Niger, but were disarmed on entering into Nigerian territory. So this meant that the revolution, or the war that was launched in January 2012 was especially violent, was especially imbalanced, and the Malian army was not able to withstand the assault of the MNLA forces, and suffered a series of very important losses, notably in the town of Aguahok in northeastern Mali. That is important because after the surrender of the garrison at Aguahok, dozens of Malian soldiers were killed in cold blood, and this event is a very significant event in the way that the southern Malians, the term is not formed, but the southern Malians have perceived conflict, and they consider it as a delegitimation of the MNLA as a political movement. The MNLA has at different times claimed that itself was behind the Aguahok victory and its aftermath, and other times has disavowed its involvement with Aguahok. This clash at Aguahok was only one of many in which Malian army garrisons were overrun. The officers were not prepared to fight, maybe not willing to fight. The men, much seems to be the same for the men. It must be said they were poorly equipped and not in a position to withstand the opponents that they found in front of them. This army dissatisfaction led to a series of events in Bamako, which I won't linger on, but the most notable of which would be the coup d'etat of March 2012, in which a young captain seized power and chased ATT from the presidential palace, ATT being the former president Amadou Touré, everyone calls him ATT. ATT was chased from power and has since taken refuge in Senegal. The junta, which then took power, led by Captain Amadou Senegal, insisted that its goal was to restore democracy in the state, but also to refurbish the Mali army to better able it to fight in the north. This didn't happen. Within a couple of weeks, the MNLA and its allies had overrun the Malian garrisons of the north, and those towns fell very quickly. Timbuktu, Gao, Menaka all fell very quickly to an MNLA assault, and thereby was produced the map that you see before you. And on April 6, 2012, the MNLA en France Catholic television, declared their independence, which was immediately not recognized by anyone. The MNLA claimed a set of military victories. It's rather unclear, and this is one of the characteristic elements of the conflict. It's rather unclear what the MNLA did and didn't do, and what its other allies, notably Ansar Dine, Al-Qaeda Islamic Maghreb, and Mujal, might have done or not done. I've already talked about Al-Qaeda Islamic Maghreb, ACME. Let me just say something briefly about Mujal and Ansar Dine. There are a set of complicated players here, I realize. Ansar Dine is effectively a Salafist movement composed mostly of Malian Tuaregs, led by the figure of Iyad Agali, who was a major figure in the Malian rebellions of the 1990s, has been a fighter in the Sahara since the 1970s and 80s, notably in Libya and Chad, and had got religion at some point of the worst kind, first in Mali and then later while serving with the Malian government as a diplomat in Saudi Arabia, from which he was expelled for his proclivities. So Ansar Dine is a violent Salafist movement, sometimes allied, sometimes at odds with the MNLA, and Iyad Agali is a sort of disaffected member of a significant Tuareg elite, which is composed of the backbone of the MNLA itself. The Mujal is a separate movement which is related to ACME. Some see it as a dissident movement from ACME. Other analysts think it's essentially kind of a franchise of ACME. The relationship isn't entirely clear. It is composed of Mauritanians, of Western Saharans, and Malians, and others. Its base, really, its core has been, until recently, in Gao. And the links between narco-trafficking and Mujal are much clearer and more direct than the links between narco-trafficking and ACME as a whole. The evidence for ACME as a whole is less clear. The evidence for Mujal is clearer. So this is the group of allied. These are the allied groups that seized power in the north. The public proclamation of the independence of Azawad stated that it would be a second republic. But that clearly was not in the interest of some of the other actors. And as I say, that call of independence was unrecognized by and large. I added here to the calendar, April 6th. The end of April, beginning of May, an event that is often forgotten but actually extremely important for what's happened since, the so-called War of the Berets in Bamako, in which the paratroopers and the regular army came into conflict. And this was an especially violent clash in Bamako, mini war in Bamako. What it meant was that many of the best trained soldiers of the Malian army were either killed in those clashes or were taken prisoner by the rest of the Malian army, and they have been held and tortured since, only very recently released. This had the important effect of stripping the Malian army of some of its best soldiers at a very crucial moment and enhancing the power of Captain Senegal and his junta. However, Senegal and his junta were pushed by ECOWAS to give up power, the Organization of West African States, to allow a civilian government to take position, to take power. And they then allowed a constitutional transition by which Dioncounda Traoré, who was the Speaker of the National Assembly and a longtime member of the Adama political party, would become the interim president for a period of 6 weeks. We're still in that 6 weeks. Obviously, Dioncounda Traoré is long past his sell-by date, but no other political solution has yet been arrived at. At the same time as Dioncounda Traoré was put in place as the president, Sheikh Modibo Diarra, former astrophysician for NASA and employee of Microsoft Africa, and Howard University student and New York resident, was made prime minister. He ran a technocratic government, or was meant to run a technocratic government. He ran mostly a disheveled kind of government that was satisfactory to no one, although he was seen as being very close to Blaise Compaoré, who was the ECOWAS mediator and president of Burkina Faso. I'm skipping over much here, but there's a long period of indecision in Bamako in which it was not at all clear whether it was the junta that remained in power, whether the presidency had some power, or whether Sheikh Modibo Diarra was in power. The president, Dioncounda Traoré, was beaten nearly to death by a mob that assaulted the presidential palace, and he was then out of commission for many long months. Sheikh Modibo effectively was seen to be running the show on the civilian side, but many believe that Captain Senegal maintained the real reins of power. So we have a very divided Malian political class, which couldn't decide what to do, and a very divided civilian government, which was unable to reestablish its supremacy over the military junta. There's a series of blockages there in southern political situation, which is often overlooked, particularly in the U.S. press, which is more focused on what's happening in the north. So there is the fact that the junta remained in power. Early on it was quite popular, later it was much less popular. But there's a certain fraction, a very loud faction of the political class, a minority but a loud minority, argued that it was the junta that was most legitimate and that the political class was entirely discredited. These are some of the tensions that prevailed in southern Mali while northern Mali was under occupation. It became very significant that hundreds of thousands of people were displaced in northern Mali. Many of them are refugees in the neighboring countries, Niger, Mauritania, Burkina Faso, or unofficial refugees in Algeria, in the case of many of the Tuareg. But there were also many internally displaced people who come to southern Mali and were living with families and friends in southern Mali, putting great strain on Malian households, notably in Bamako, but elsewhere as well. That constituted a form of political pressure over the months, which would push the army to say that it was going to act in the north. Jean-Claude Traoré was under pressure to act in the north. Amadou Sango was under pressure to act in the north, but no action was taken. There was a long diplomatic process, which I won't enter into here, to gain both ECOWAS support and African Union support, but also eventually United Nations support for some kind of intervention force, which was originally cast as a kind of peacekeeping force, although there was no peace to be kept. This is a set of forces that were at work that led to the crisis of January 10th, 2013. And there are two parallel crises that happened essentially at the same time. And one is a threat to Jean-Claude Traoré, in which many believe that Captain Sanogo was once again going to seize power. So there was political tension in Bamako was very, very strong on the 9th and 10th of January of this year. And there was a strong belief that there was an imminent coup threat against Jean-Claude Traoré. Important point here is that the kind of the pro-junta elements of the political parties had long insisted that there be no foreign intervention in Mali, especially in Bamako, that there be no foreign troops stationed in Bamako. And so effectively Jean-Claude Traoré was, in some sense, the hostage of his own security forces, a condition of captivity which must have been felt very acutely by men who had been beaten nearly to death only a few months earlier, when the same security forces allowed Obama to assault the presidential palace. So Jean-Claude was very much threatened on the 10th of January. At the same time, the forces of Ansardine and Mujal and Akmi, who had long since pushed aside MNLA from its positions in northern Mali, had rendered MNLA effectively irrelevant on the terrain in northern Mali. That coalition, now composed of the core of jihadi Salafist fighters who were better funded via narco-trafficking, but also some support from outside actors, allegedly Qatar, and they were able to relaunch. They launched an assault against the town of Sabare in central Mali, which is actually not indicated on this map. Yes. The thing about Sabare that is essential is there are two airports in Mali that can support long-distance cargo planes and military use, and one is at Sabare, the other is at Sabare. Mopti and Sabare are twin cities that are effectively developed in the Bakel that cinches the waist of Mali. If these two towns were taken, notably Sabare, it would have been a catastrophic event in terms of the strategy for preserving peace in southern Mali. It's at that point the French decided to intervene and did so very quickly. I've gone on for about 20 minutes now, and I've tried to speak quickly, and I think I've left out a great deal of things, notably some of the hedges and issues at stake for the French, about which Roland Marchal will speak. I had several other points I wanted to make, and perhaps I'll come back and make them later, following up on what Roland Marchal will say.
Thank you. So what I'm going to do is not very much a very deep analysis. It's more or less to try to explain the decision making process followed in France, the questions that you could raise on this, and then look as well on the international partners since France is around, and maybe trying at least to challenge the implicit meaning of the title of this seminar, which I found not very balanced, but anyway, let me say mean, on 11 January, so Hollande said that France will respond to the request of the Malian president, and that the military operation will last as long as required. Of course, I mean, the legality of this intervention is debatable. The government in Bamako can't be seen as fully legitimate, and as well the UN Security Council resolution 2070 and 2085 do not provide any mandate for non-African forces to intervene militarily. Yet, so there are obvious explanations. The first one is, of course, neo-colonial, and is the FrançAfrique. And the second one is, well, actually, François Hollande appears for many as quite a mediocre president, and therefore is trying to bet on a military intervention to appear as a strong man. And you could even find some evidence that is the public opinion in France is getting more positive on him. Yet, what I would like to tell you is that actually it doesn't make much sense if you know French politics, and I believe Hollande and French people know a bit about politics. Sarkozy has tried the same kind of solution and failed dramatically. You get a huge rate of approval at the beginning of an intervention, but 2 weeks after, things get back to normal, and therefore you understand that you may have to deliver more on economic and social policies than on a military adventure overseas. Now, what is interesting and maybe make more sense is to look at François Hollande. François Hollande is not someone who had in his past paid much attention to Africa. He has very few African friends, has no background on Africa, is very much someone who try actually to keep African politics at bay. Very, in that sense, very supportive of Lionel Jospin, former minister of the late 1990s, early 2000s, who basically say no ingérence, no indifférence. And even in the debate on the Malian crisis, whatever were the diplomatic work undertaken by his own administration. Let us remember that he came to power only in May 2012. He said, he declares in October, for instance, I'm adamant about this, we will not put boots on the ground. And you could as well find evidence of his, let us say, minor interest to the continent, looking at the people who have been in charge at the Élysée. The Africa cell, and it's not, it's just a feeling shared by many observers more than my personal view, is a diplomat who hasn't been an ambassador, Hélène Le Gall, and actually a PhD student of my institution, who is number 2. So they are, let us say, seen. If you compare with the previous team at the Élysée, at the Africa cell, they are quite junior, and therefore that shows already that there is not much investment on it. Now, of course, as I said, Hollande came to power in May last year, and there was already a debate. So the debate was framed in a number of assumptions, which are interesting to remember, to remind. The first one is. First, the state apparatus in France was split on the, let us say, the threats and the danger. Maybe is still today. Basically, the secret services see the Tuaregs in a very, I would say, traditional colonial view. Well, they are nice people. They know them because they have been working on addressing the conflicts at different times, so they have their people. Iyad has been very much in touch with a number of French intelligence officers over the years. And basically the secret services were very much in a position to say, let us support MNLA, and let us fund them, let us even maybe train them so that they could fight back the Islamists. Of course, this might have been actually the policy followed by Nicolas Sarkozy up to the end of his mandate. François Hollande stopped that very, very clearly on one side. On the other side, we could as well argue that many MNLA commanders actually shifted their allegiance to Ansar ad-Din, and therefore the idea to support a group that has very eloquent spokespeople but actually much less troops on the ground became something irrelevant. The Commandment of Special Operations, ARD as well, is called in the French acronym is COS, Commandement des Opérations Spéciales, was even more confident that, let us say, the constituency of those armed groups was very limited, especially, of course, ACMI, because ACMI is not, is not that numerous. We are talking all in all, we may differ on that, Greg may give his view later on, but at the top maybe there were just much less than 10,000 fighters. So it's not a big insurgency. I mean, we are not talking about big names, big numbers, and so on. And so the special forces were basically, looking at the situation and saying, if we go there, maybe we could clean the mess. And but of course, politically, there was a vacuum at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs up to very recently. Laurent Fabius, who is more a rival to François Hollande than really a close supporter as the Minister of Defense, Mr. Le Drian, was very careful about the political implications of any military boots on the ground beyond collecting intelligence, what the American, French, and other special forces have been doing for quite some time now. Now, the feeling, as Greg said, was on 10 January that the situation in Mali was deteriorating at the speed of light, and therefore there wasn't the idea of bringing or setting up an international African forces was going nowhere, because the resolution 2085 was actually quite not a decision, because there was no timetable, there was a number of key issues that there was no idea and no definition or no precision of the generation of forces. So basically, it was like business as usual at the Security Council, and of course that means that nothing would happen. So the question we could ask is, first, was the French military operation starting 11 January planned? Yes, it was planned, but actually quite badly planned. It was mostly the kind of work a chief of staff does in any army in the world, in a developed world at least. And we see that in the first very few days of the intervention, the confusion, the fact that the French had to use aircrafts from France and not have already based those aircrafts in Africa. So you have the issue of refueling the aircraft was a headache. The fact that in Bamako the defense attaché and his team were still the same number, though there was a huge operation, just showed that the planning was there in theory, but practically the French officials made their decision on the spot, more than with a long and deep preparation you should expect from such kind of professional army. A second question is, was it one or two interventions? Because of course, you could discuss many assumptions made by the French, and actually I'm surprised you endorse some of them. Was this offensive around, for what I know, about 2,000 fighters able to take over Bamako? I felt we were getting something like the attack on Benghazi by 10 tanks and a few hundred Gaddafi's soldiers. or they could kill many people, but to control such a big city was certainly not the most likely. Nevertheless, that was what they presented as the evidence. And what you could have expected is a counter-offensive to basically stop the offensive by those movements without getting into the reconquest of the north. Why it did not happen is, for what I know, I may change this analysis later on, but is basically the French were in a position where they felt that if they stop the intervention near Mopti on Sevare, they would basically have to stay there because they will freeze a front line, and then there will be even less speed in the international community to move on the issue because they will secure Bamako. So they're deal done, and they felt that that was the worst for them. So that's why they decided that if they stop, then it's better to try to reach north. Was it unilateral? Yes, of course. The Malian army is still today not ready, and we should be clear. There are a lot. If you watch France 24 or if you read a number of French newspapers, there are nice pieces of propaganda. The Malian army is very loosely associated with the fighting itself, but of course the Malian officers are brought when the time of communication comes, when they have to talk to the press to make sure that this is not seen as a French intervention, more as something that is, first Malian and then international, with new African troops joining the fray. Now, was FrançAfrique at play? Okay. I think all habits die hard, but this is true for the French politicians, but is it true as well for the analysts? Because there is some kind of laziness to use the argument without checking it. If you see, the parameters of FrançAfrique intervention, the first thing you would have to assume is that François Hollande has a quite cozy relationship with Malian presidents, especially the current one, who in the past or currently has been able to fund the Socialist Party on the elections in France. I don't believe I take a risk saying that this did not happen. Now, there is another parameter for this kind of FrançAfrique stuff, which is typically what we have in Gabon or in Senegal, a huge French community, not only, and people who are very relevant economically. So Ivory Coast is a good example because, in Ivory Coast, most of the French residents there were, many were actually controlling the middle-size, medium-size in the enterprises, who were very significant in the formal economic sector. This is not the case in Mali. Actually, there are around 6,000 French citizens. Most of them are actually Malians, or dual citizens or binationals, the name you use in English. Now, of course, let us look national resources, because FrançAfrique likes to loot African resources. Now the problem is basically there are two slightly meaningful, I accept, migrations, which is cotton and gold, and I believe if you look at the companies, you won't find any French one. Look maybe South Africa, so let us wait for the South Africans to come to say. And so this is a reason that personally I wouldn't support all that. I believe as well you could have more now maybe more French politics related explanations. The first one is, as I mentioned before, the Africa cell is not seen as very strong, very influential Marchal, why actually the military at the Elysee are very much better organized. And the military advisor, the presidential military advisor, is someone, people who are following military events know, Benoit Puga, a general who has been the head of the Special Operation Forces, who as well has been a key planner in what happened in February 2008 in Chad, who as well is someone very much reflecting the military lobby. At the time, the discussion on French budget for the current year was indicating a decrease of defense budget, even though there were already a plan to support logistically military intervention in Mali. So there is as well another element that is not often noticed by too lazy observers, is the white paper on defense. It's an exercise we don't have in France as regularly as in the US, but this white paper on defense is very important at this stage, because the discussion takes place at the moment we are basically bankrupt, and as well as there is a strong sense that the defense apparatus is not fit for what France still pretends to be. Now, so you could have the FrançAfrique explanation, or you could maybe look something different, like the British intervention in Sierra Leone. Just make your mind. Now, let us look the other actors, the European Union. So again, the European Union is quite a very strange body, and when you discuss European policy and especially attitude towards the intervention in Mali, you have to take into account many different issues that are maybe not so connected to the proper assessment of the situation in Mali. Let me give you some examples. First, the nomination of Romano Prodi as the UN SRSG had a clear meaning for the British. The British saw that those bloody French, again, wanted to take the European money allocated to Somalia to pay for AMISOM, and take part of this money to the Malian operation. As you may know, Somalia is a high priority for the UK government. They didn't like that, so they opposed, or they were very cold up to very recently on the intervention in Mali. Now, the other European countries were actually very bitter against the French for the previous military interventions. Well, Libya, the French started alone without even discussing at the European level. And the Brits follow because too much money there, too much oil, the way you want. And therefore the competition was there, but the European Union as such wasn't associated to the discussion on what to do about Libya. So there is a lot of resentment against this behavior. But this is true as well on Chad. When what is called EUFOR Chad started in 2008, the French made, were adamant to explain that the aim of the operation was to save Darfur, to help the refugees, secure eastern Chad, and avoid the Janjaweed to come and kill innocent people. Well, at the end of 1 year after, it was clear for most, or I believe all, European countries that went to Chad that actually the main aim of the intervention was fulfilled, was achieved, that was to save Idriss Déby, to allow him the time to buy military equipment, maybe from France, and as well to avoid offensive from the Chadian oppositions based in Darfur. So therefore, people felt, or states, in European states felt they were used for a policy that wasn't their own, and say, well, next time we will be even more reluctant. Of course, behind that, there is a clear perception, or let us say a tension within the European state, that France as UK on other purposes, is trying to make the European Union pay for its national policies towards the African continent. And as well, there is a debate which is very important, which is how to balance the interest towards what used to be Eastern Europe and what is today Africa. Now, you could see as well that things change very quickly as soon as the situation on the ground changed. I was in Brussels very early January. At that time, there were basically, I think, 6 or 7 countries contributing to the European Union training mission to Mali, mostly from Southern Europe. In a matter of 2 weeks, it was decided to actually strengthen the mandate, increase the number of trainers, double the budget, and countries such as the United Kingdom now is part of that. So what I'm saying is, if you want to analyze this European Union policy, don't look only Mali. You have to look at a much broader set of issues and so on. Now, second point is, of course, the Americans. No, the Americans, I'm sorry to say, I'm working on Somalia. They basically never ever accepted the idea of dialogue with any Islamist group. They killed quite a number, or they made allow others to kill them. And they keep talking about ungoverned spaces, terrorist surveillance, and they have spent over the last 8 years around $1 billion in France-Saharan counter-terrorist partnership, and they are watching what is happening in Mali on TV screen. That's very interesting. So we could have a discussion later on why so, but certainly. Again, I'm not saying that they should intervene. What I'm saying is it's very interesting to see that despite everything, the parameters by which decisions are taken on Sahel seems to be quite different on parameters used to assess situations in Somalia, Yemen, or Afghanistan. Now, ECOWAS, again, it's something that you could look at the traditional or the usual behavior. Basically, we are ready to provide troops, but those soldiers will come naked, so we want the international community to pay for the socks, the boots, the weapons, the ammunition, the food, the logistics, and so on. This is happening as well, and what is now going on in Addis Ababa is a good example. But beyond that, there are so many other more important issues. The first one is that the key players, especially Burkina Faso and Ivory Coast, are in a very sensitive situation with Paris and Hollande. The fact that a number of those countries have problems with their own military, and of course the way this could play in an international or regional intervention is something very significant. The case of Chad as well is very interesting. Idriss Déby has been trying to convince journalists that the French requested him to intervene. The French officials are adamant to say, we only asked him for information if he wanted to intervene, but he wants us to ask him because, of course, they have to give something in exchange. I was in N'Djamena just before coming here. In N'Djamena, the talks of the town is that actually the request for Chadian troops to intervene came from Washington, not Paris. And then you will have to look whether they are as good as journalists are saying, without collateral damages and so on. And of course, you could raise 2 important questions. The first one is thinking about Chad is, there have been this crisis in Central African Republic, and now this in Mali. So, what Chad is trying to achieve? Does he want to appear as a kind of regional military hegemon, though he hasn't the population, the diplomatic influence, the economic power, but yet he could project troops outside his border? Is it a way to avoid, like Uganda, Rwanda, and so many, and maybe South Africa, criticisms on his internal politics by playing an important role in regional operations. Algeria, this is the last I want to mention quickly as well, is something very important because at the end of the day, AQIM is from Algeria. And of course, Algeria has a long-term policy of avoiding foreign troops in its neighborhoods, but at the same time seems to have a number of contradictions in keeping the region safe. Maybe I will come back to that, but one point has to be very clear. The fact that you had this terrorist attack on oil installations is really a turning point in the Algerian war, whether you call it civil or against terrorist groups. And I believe that this is it's a turning point because for the first time, really, energy installation infrastructure have been attacked, and this is going to have a lasting effect. Now, I have been too long, so let me just conclude by saying a few things. First, the military victories we are witnessing are not surprising, even if the media are, good propagating the French official view. It is sure that the French soldiers are better equipped to that. It is as well sure that France wants to give a sense of victory with a strong Malian support so that they could be in a position to leave when they will, and I believe as soon as possible. Now, there are many important problems that, of course, are not solved or addressed by that. The first one, which is a strategic mistake, or let us say at least something that is going to be very negative on the medium run, is the fact that the problem of North Mali is one thing. Those armed groups, especially the jihadi groups, is something marginal in that reality. But because of the military intervention, now those groups have become the center of Northern Malian politics, and this is going to be very difficult because you have to articulate a political discourse and a narrative and even express conditions for political solution that should have been quite different of dealing with those groups. The second is, of course, one thing is to win battles, the other is to, working on Somalia, this is a lesson learned from quite a long time, is how to govern, how to set up legitimate local authorities after the victory. And we see the problems right now in Kidal. The MNLA and the MIA is claiming to control the city and say the French are welcome, but not the Malian army. Now, the government in Mali and the army, at least, I think share the belief that actually the problem is first the MNLA has now includes many people who are from other jihadi group or from Ansar al-Din, and therefore they should go there. They are the legitimate authorities. So what will happen next is to be seen. The third one is, of course, we are far from Bamako, and would the Bamako elites, Greg is going to talk about that more than myself, will be ready to change or take measures to make sure that it's not a restoration of a political system that failed dramatically, while the French, so busy with the military, have done very little or have achieved very little on that aspect. And maybe fourth, what kind of economic alternative you have to all those trafficking and so on? Because if you look beyond the flash words, you see that there is a population that made a living from those traffics, and so what's going to happen to them if you associate unilaterally trafficking with the jihadists as it's the case today? France, anyway, is going to bear the full responsibility on those issues, and I believe willingly or unwillingly, France will be taken responsible with good reasons for all violations of human rights committed by Malian and foreign African troops. He will be as well be taken responsible for the inability of political settlement in the north, or to the restoration of a political system as it was before the coup. So to a certain extent, this operation is started, but it's not yet over.
Okay, thank you, Roland. Yes, I think we're a long way from the intervention being over. I want to add a few things to follow up on what you were saying, and then open the floor to some questions and debate. I think the first thing I wanted to say was that there have been a series of false arguments that have really impeded both political solutions and analysis up to this point. One of them was the false argument that the Malian army could do the job against its opponents. This was a kind of fairy tale that was told for a long time and caused a very long months of delay. There are probably only about 3,000 fighters, roughly, in the Salvador's jihadi forces. The MLA has numbers slightly more in the past, but many of those MLA fighters are now Sardine fighters, and now they're going to become once again MLA fighters. These labels will be quite misleading. We've seen some of the officers and leaders changing hats very quickly from the Mali National Army to the MLA to Ansardine, back to the MLA, or potentially the MIA, which is the Mouvement Islamique de l'Azawad, which is a non-secular version of the MLA, which is opposed to the jihadis. So there are a whole set of factions that are present on the ground. Many more will emerge. Most of those labels will be misleading. I wanted to say that this argument about the Malian army was a false argument. It's been replaced, I think, with possibly another false argument, which is that ECOWAS troops themselves will be able to secure northern Mali. That seems to me unlikely, though it remains to be proven one way or another. I want to also protest against the argument that intervention represents some kind of solution in the short or medium term. It's not a solution. It just creates a different set of problems. It changes the original problem. Hopefully it changes the original problem in a way that is preferable to the problem that previously existed. But nonetheless, it will generate a new set of problems, and some of those will be enormously complex. At the moment of 10/11 January 2013, there was an intersection of the interests of France, or the French government, and the interests of Malians, many Malians, and of the Malian government. Those interests will diverge increasingly in the weeks and months to come. They might diverge quite sharply. The test of the taking and the eventual occupation of Kidal will be a very important one in terms of seeing how the space between Paris and Bamako will get wider and wider in the months to come. But I think it's really important to remember that there was a strong divergence at that particular, strong convergence at that particular moment, and they will diverge in the future. At the moment at which we stand, which is this very unclear moment in which Timbuktu and Gao apparently have been taken back by the French army with its Malian allies. It's not entirely clear that those places will be easy to hold. It's not clear what kind of conflict will emerge. However, as we enter into the sort of Kidal phase of the conflict, which is just over the horizon, and already we can see it in Timbuktu and Gao, the workings of retribution, revenge, provocation, maneuvering. And if you look at the conflicts that have happened in northern Mali in the past, over the last 20 years, the first episode of actual fighting is often fairly short. In 2006, the accords were signed before the fighting even really started. The long playing out of the conflicts, the shifting of allegiances, the creation of new kind of constellations, new political and military constellations, the new claims that emerge and subside, all that actually has taken much longer historically, and there's every reason to think that that will be the case in the present. What the role of France might be in that is, of course, unknowable at the moment, and who else might come in as an important blockade also remains to be seen. But for any analysis of what's going on in northern Mali, we're going to need a much, much more granular approach than that currently obtains in the media, or in fact in most other places, including amongst most analysts. We're going to need an extremely granular approach that is almost topographical, that can take individual people and their factions and their sets of allies and see how they've moved across time and what kind of constellations they might create. But these labels about MNLA, MIA, Ansardine, Mujal, etc., all these are going to be, they're all going to change very quickly in the time to come, and new acronyms and new factions will emerge. France has proven to some extent that it can make war. It hasn't proven, and it cannot make the peace in northern Mali. All of these conflicts have begun in northern Mali for reasons that actually they're quite local. Sometimes, in fact, they're quite personal. Sometimes, in fact, they go down to the relationship between individual people or between families. And part of the solution is going to have to be found on a very local, granular level. Finding interlocutors who can shepherd that process is going to be an extraordinarily difficult task. None of the current interlocutors have anything like the depth of knowledge to do that. They don't have anything like the credibility to do that, and they're largely seen as illegitimate in most circles, I believe, in Mali and beyond. And I'm talking about Blaise Compaoré, the president of Burkina Faso, to whom ECOWAS has confided this dossier, and I'm talking about Romano Prodi of the UN. Neither of whom seems to be adequate at the task at hand. There are many questions that we haven't touched on. We have not touched at all on the question of Europeans still held hostage in the Sahara. Talked about the effects of the economy that's produced, but not only the current hostages. We haven't talked much about the resource question, although we can talk about that. We haven't talked much about the argument about neo-colonialism, although I think it's not an argument I have great patience for. Let's just put it that way. Nor have we talked much about the most important terms of the debate in Mali itself and Bamako in particular, which are around two key phrases, and it's important to see how these two phrases move over time. And one is territorial integrity. The original claim of the MLA was they wanted autonomy. Later, it was they wanted nation-state independence. That was what was proclaimed on April 6th. It's moved back to autonomy since then. It's important that Francois Hollande, in his statements over the last several days, has insisted upon the territorial integrity of Mali. That suggests that the idea of an independent Azawad is not something that will be pursued, whereas under the previous government in France, the MLA received a much warmer welcome, if you will. If the MLA or Tuareg nationalists seem to have little hope at the moment for an independent nation state, it is partly because they no longer have France pushing that dossier. The other important term that is floating around is in fact not the term of jihadi, Salafist, Islamist, etc., these different kind of loose labels that were used to describe these narco-trafficking, hostage-taking, hudud practicing, figures in the north. I think rebels is also a very bad term to capture that group, by the way. But that's not the question I want to talk about. I think the question of Islam in Mali broadly, and the question of laicite or secularism. And that's the other term I think it's important to watch out for in the months potentially to come. Whether or not Mali would preserve its territorial integrity was a real question at a given moment. It might remain a real question, although it seems to be there's a strong consensus by Mali's neighbors and by many Malians and by France, etc., that territorial integrity be maintained. So that's now become a form of common sense that it wasn't previously. The other important term is going to be the question of laicite. If Malians get together and have a national conversation that many of the political parties have been pushing for some time, if a national consultation is again held, if a new constitution is written, which is the goal of some but not all of the political players, if that conversation actually takes place, laicite is ingrained in the secularism is ingrained is written into the current constitution. It's been written into every Malian constitution since it was the French constitution. But I think it's a live and real question of whether or not Mali's political actors in the north and in the south, but especially in Bamako, would continue to subscribe to that political value, which has waxed and waned over the last several years. And so I think that question of territorial integrity is important to watch how that moves over time, and the question of laicite is actually important to watch how that moves over time in discourses to come. But I'm sure there are many questions, so I just wanted to open up to those. Thank you.
I was wondering, thanks very much for a great discussion so far. I was wondering if you'd be able to talk a little bit more about ECOWAS. Both of you seem quite cynical in general talking about them, and if you just discuss what you see as the role for ECOWAS going forward, maybe how it compares to other ECOWAS interventions in the region over the past few years.
I don't believe I'm not cynical. I'm not able to be cynical. When you see what ECOWAS has been doing over the last 8 months, you're not cynical. You're just amazed. And no, I believe we have we have players such as Blaise Compaoré who have done everything to, I would say, to keep the crisis alive. He started very early in setting up the interim cabinet, and he continued with I think up to the end with the mediation. And so the question is why he's doing so. Is it because he has still the ambition to be the regional leader he tried to be with Gaddafi's support a decade ago, or is it just that he feels that with the shift, the political shift in France, he may get not as much support as he needs internally for his internal politics? This is a question I would ask. Ouattara has been the strong leader we know. And again, the relation with Hollande are not that good, though France is putting a lot of money in Ivory Coast. And you see clearly how countries such as Niger and Senegal have played another line, which was, of course, which is much closer to Paris' view. So I don't believe, we have a number of issues. The first one is Nigeria and Boko Haram, and whether Nigerian strong involvement will mean some kind of connection between what is happening in Sahel and what is happening in Boko Haram. And this is very dangerous because we always, we may get a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, announcing connections and then helping those groups to build deep connections that aren't there today. The other is the usual split. What you have to understand is the right-wing party in France ruled France from 1995 up to, I'm not sure this is always relevant when you discuss Africa politics, but there have been people like Blaise Compaoré or even Ouattara had a very personal relation with Sarkozy, like Idriss Déby. These things is gone, and they have to play different games to try to rebuild the connection with Paris that they feel necessary. And in that sense, I would say the FrançAfrique is more important on the African side than on the French side. And but this is not always analyzed this way by people who are always so focused on the center or the powerful French or so-called powerful, because they're actually not that influential.
Can I just add two things to that very quickly? One is that it's not clear that Paris is necessarily playing the line of Niamey, etc. And I think as you're suggesting, Niamey is playing the line of Paris. I think as you're suggesting that the French perception of the situation is also influenced by what its African partners are saying, especially Macky Sall, President Sugo, Niger, etc. The other thing I wanted to say is that the longer the conflict continues, and especially in terms of what might eventually turn into a peacekeeping operation, which will likely be staffed largely by ECOWAS officers, more people will profit from its continuity, from the status quo that will emerge, right? And if that status quo involves narco-trafficking is extraordinarily profitable, one would expect that there would be officers who would be involved in that narco-trafficking and would be increasingly interested in maintaining their presence in northern Mali. And those might well be ECOWAS officers. And I can clearly imagine such a scenario emerging over the months to come. Back to Sierra Leone, Liberia, but worth even more money, right? Let me just go, I think maybe if I go like this, it might be easier to be able to take. Can we just take three in a row? Jim, and then over this way?
Yeah, thank you for emphasizing the internal local situation today that a drone base is being sought to be acquired in Northwest Africa, and we have troops in Africa Command in Morocco. So the question I'm going to ask you guys is that, you know, why would the United States not want to simply sit there and say, we're going to go and get these guys, period, end of story, ignoring some of the complicated local issues you have, because they already saw an example of an oil installation attack. So why would the United States not simply say, we're going to start intervening clandestinely to take out AQIM? Because that's the thrust of the kind of discussions I've seen in some circles in Washington for the past couple of years.
Okay. Let's take a couple more questions. It's a good one. I think there was a woman. Yes.
So, what is going to be necessary for the Malian government or African forces to hold power in these areas? And then previous efforts by the Malian government to make peace with the militant Tuaregs obviously hasn't worked. What's going to be necessary moving forward for something like that to work?
Excellent question. I think that I was going to go this way, but people already had a hand up. I'm sorry. I'll come back to you guys. Is that okay? So I was going to go to Ari, and I was going to go further over.
Yeah, that you both mentioned that due to all the backbiting, it often wasn't clear who was in charge in Bamako, even of the southern part of the country, let alone the north, and that was true for weeks and weeks. And the question is, has there been any change in that in the past couple of days? Has the French intervention produced a winners and losers among the southern factions in Bamako, and it's more clear who's in charge, or is it just still we have no clue who's on top and who isn't?
Okay, thanks. Let's take those three, and then let's come back if that's okay. Do you want to start?
Please.
Because of course I only answer once. Why would the U.S. not act with drones, etc.? I think that's an issue that people have on the table. I think it's easy to overestimate their. I'm not sure if anyone American, but I'll say their. Easy to overestimate their capacity. I think my sense is there's also disagreement amongst people who inform these situations about whether or not the MNLA or something like it remains a viable proxy force on the ground, and if that's the case, would that be preferable to the remote control drone strike type of operation? That's my sense, that there's some debate about that over the last several months, and that has influenced the waxing and waning of American. It hasn't actually been a policy, in fact. Whatever it's been, it's influenced by that debate, I think. I'm going to leave to Roland Marchal the question of what is needed to hold the North and bring people into a peace agreement, because he's older and wiser than I am. I will answer Ari's question about has the French intervention produced winners and losers. In my estimation, I think of those that most analysts, the civilian government of Tonkola Traore and Django Sissoko, the prime minister, has its hand considerably strengthened by the presence of foreign forces in Bamako itself. And I think that's a really important part of the intervention, that there were something like 400 French troops who arrived in Bamako on the 11th or 12th of January, and that stabilized the civilian government in a way that hadn't previously been stabilized.
Yeah, Sanogo hasn't given up. I think just yesterday or 2 days ago, I was discussing with one of my colleagues who wrote a piece in the London Review of Books on Mali, Stephen Smith. So you could have a look at that. And there are some good French arms traffickers are now trying to deal with Sanogo because it's not that poor, though he's not funding the Socialist Party yet. And so which means the crisis in Mali has an end, has no end right now, and really it's a very fluid situation. I would be extremely careful because because this is not going to be a short intervention, and therefore we are at the time let's say the president and the prime minister got strengthened by the French military intervention. But let us look events. We are in mind that there could be counter dynamics that could show up. And the question of Kidal, for instance, the way the French will handle those claims on the Malian army, if really the French intervene to stop the Malian army, killing people the way they have been doing, what will happen next? It's very uncertain. On the U.S. Policy, well, maybe the U.S. are smarter than the French. They know that there is no short intervention. So I believe this is certainly, for what I read in the U.S. press, a feeling share at the White House. So if you get there, then you're going to stay for quite some time. I believe they have already special forces on the ground for quite some time. They have already a base to observe Mali. As the French, they have been, CIA or whatever, intelligence community, that's the term to use. People in Burkina Faso, there is a good paper in the Washington Post on that. And you see, in that you see all the ambiguity, the political ambiguity connecting Washington, Paris, and Ouagadougou. Because on one side you're highly critical of what Blaise Compaoré is doing. On the other side, you see Burkina Faso as a strategic asset to monitor a crisis in Mali. I believe one thing that is very important, and I'm sorry I didn't take the time to talk about it, is Algeria. I think at least that many European analysts would inclined to believe that why the US has been so cautious is very much because the Algerians were as well very reluctant to accept and to frame a discussion on northern Mali the way maybe Africa and the French framed it, and this is something, and we have seen over the last 3 or 4 months, 3 months I think of 2012, we have seen so many American officials traveling to Mali trying to slightly have a conversation on what to do next in Mali. And that raised important questions on Algeria. Algeria thought that he had won the war against terror in his own country. That's what the regime is saying. Well, what has been happening now shows that many, I think the number of people killed in Nigeria throughout the civil war is as big as in Yugoslavia, and maybe key issues haven't yet been solved, and I doubt this regime in Algeria is willing to talk about that. The same way, when the situation in Mali deteriorated, just before the Algerian tried to preempt any internationalization of what was happening in northern Mali. So they set up with the regions, especially Mali, Niger, Mauritania, a kind of common chief of staff in Manwasset. And so that was a good idea, African problems, African solution, and Algeria didn't want any external actors to play in. I agree with that. I believe this is fair. The problem is, from the beginning of the crisis up to now, this chief of staff, this institution hasn't done one thing. So you have to question whether Algeria is actually preferring to have its jihadists in northern Mali than at home, and beyond the Tuareg issue. And so you have really, we need a whole discussion on what the Algerian policy is, because there are many contradictions within the regime, and maybe as well we need among the security services, which is the main pillar of it, which is not the only pillar, but which is the main pillar of it. And then the question on peace in North Mali. I believe I have a flight to take. I see a lot of naivety in what has been going on the French side, and with the illusion rooted in the history of the previous conflicts that we can't solve it. Now it's a new situation. But what I I said, what I believe is you can't move in the north if you haven't people in Bamako that just you need people in Bamako who want to do more than just take revenge on what happened. And I believe those people are minority right now in Bamako. And this is my main concern.
We'll see.
What are the chances, what are the chances that the Francophone countries will allow Nigeria to play a leading role in this?
We're going to take three, right? There are two people who are right. So whatever.
I had a couple of questions. First is, you were talking about the relationships between French leaders and African leaders, personal relationships. Then what Laurent Fabius, what is the role that Laurent Fabius could play since he was the Prime Minister of François Mitterrand and has strong relationships with many of the African leaders? And also, when talking about durable peace in Mali and kind of security and everything, would a strong French presence in North Mali for a long time, maybe through the form of a military base and negotiate the autonomy of the Tuareg, would help diminish narco traffic and security, or is that utopia?
Or dystopia. Question you.
Yes, I have a question for Roland Marchal. You mentioned France is broke, so I want to know, do you think France is intervened in this situation for the possession or influence over gold, uranium, and petrol? And my second question is, you also mentioned that France is looking to the EU for pretty much flipping the bill for this intervention. Is France also looking to the Malian government to also pay the cost for France intervening and trying to straighten things out, so to speak? That's my question.
Well, one thing is clear. I think the key issue, I personally, as a French citizen, am concerned, is not that François Hollande wants to grab oil, gold, whatever from Mali. The key issue I see myself is something more cultural or ideological. Is not only the terrorist threat, it's a certain notion of secularism that very much taints the ideology of some French politicians concerning Islam in Africa. The way they represent what should be secularism, the role of Islam, and so on. There is never an explicit discourse on that, but implicitly, I feel they have a very, I say colonial, neo-colonial. They have a very old view and very, and they are not ready to accept or even try to understand the religious dynamics in a country like Mali or others and be much more flexible. The way, for instance, they talk about they confuse jihadists, Islamists, and sometimes even Salafists. For me, is Salafi Muslims something is a great concern of me. The way they talk about Sharia is so simplistic that is a concern for me, and those people should have been grieved that Mali is actually a strong majority Muslim country. The way they talk is absolutely, they talk like if they were talking to ignorant French people. French people are ignorant, but if you want to convince the Malians, you will have to maybe be more nuanced than they are. Now, Laurent Fabius, yeah, you're right, he was Prime Minister. It was sometimes in the 1980s. And so his connection with African leaders is actually very limited. And I spent some minutes explaining that the Africa cell under Hollande is weak because actually at the time he was Prime Minister, the Africa cell was very powerful. That was the first mandate of François Mitterrand. and so you had the policy on Africa wasn't made by the Prime Minister, and so he's not someone who has much interest as well on Africa. So he's doing the job. He's quite a professional politician compared to some adventurers we had before. It's much better. But again, if you see his statements over the last weeks, you see that he actually is not very enthusiastic about the intervention, and he's very much sidelined today in the management of this, because basically every meeting, all meetings take place at the Ministry of Defense, and he has only one representative. So clearly, but that goes back as well to the political trust between the President and the Minister of Defense, which is absolutely not the same as the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
I think there was a question about will the French countries allow Nigeria to lead. I think that's, what can I say? I think that's unlikely. I'm not sure that I quite understand the sense of the question.
They asked for a chief of staff of 80 officers. Now they double the number in Addis Abeba, so I don't know if the chief of staff will be 160. So with 160 officers, you could accommodate all nationalities. You could get even at the UN now.
Okay. Any questions on this sector? Yes. One, two.
In the conversation, maybe I came in a little late, but I didn't on the argument as to why is French there. Well, France is no friend of Africa. France was accused of having something major to do with the Rwanda-Burundi situation, and that has not been discussed. The other side of it, I don't know if you have the expertise, but there is also an African solution. So we're hearing largely about what the West and the West's interest, even though you seem to be kind of like observers of it. But everything in this room primarily comes from Africa. When we walk up and down the street, all the automobiles, the rubber, and all the Africa's the breadbasket of the world. So of course, the West has a big interest. But the other thing that's not discussed, and maybe you can't because of your institutional and professional thing, is that this is a big test case because of the Arab, how can I say, kind of like explosion in the world and needing now to find new places. And Africa has to be able to solve that, and this is a big test case because, of course, Mali is very Arabic or Islamic, and we haven't. So the African solution is that the Africans have to learn how to deal with Islam and radical Islam. So so what maybe you can just kind of like speak on is if you think that there is an African solution, or you how can you say? Can you be honest and say maybe there is not an African solution? There is only a Western solution.
Okay. Another question?
Yes. It has been reported that the United States spent a lot of money, billions of dollars, training the Malian army over the last couple of years. And many of the officers that they trained defected to the other side when AQIM came in. And also, even the general who did the coup d'etat was trained by the Americans. So my question is, what do you Liberia and Sierra Leone when they were dealing with, you know, Charles Taylor and the other things going on in Sierra Leone. So going back to his question about Nigeria possibly playing a greater role in how the French, the African countries under the French persuasion, how they might react to that.
Okay. We have to, I think, conclude quickly also, just to be told. Let me just say two things about the U.S. military training question. So I think we might address some of the other issues. About the U.S. military training, it's true the U.S. has spent a lot of money over the last decade investing in trying to train small units within the Malian army. It's interesting to see what those effects are. There's some debate, obviously, as you might expect, not as much as you might hope, within within state about the effects of that and whether it was wise and how it worked, etc. It is true that Captain Amadou Hayasanago, who led the coup d'etat, had some degree of military training. The current chief of staff of the Malian army and the current director of the multi-front have much more U.S. military training, and a large part of the Malian officer corps has military training. U.S. military cooperation with Mali goes back to the 1960s, in fact, even though it was very light at the time, it was nonetheless present. It's true that several of the Tuareg, in particular colonels, who were in some of those units that had some level of U.S. military training defected or left the Malian army in January and months following. They didn't go to ACMI or Ansar Dine, they went to the MNLA. Some of them then drifted into Ansar Dine, some of them since drifted back to MNLA. That's a small number. I think it's easy to overestimate the importance of the U.S. military training. It was aimed at fairly small units. It was extensive in particular cases. Those cases are mixed, as I've suggested. The units that had the most military training were also decimated in the internal war with the Berets in April and May, so that many of those soldiers were effectively sidelined. And you could also compare the Malian army to its neighboring armies, such as Senegal, which has a larger percentage of officers who have U.S. military training. And the Senegalese army has been very disciplined in maintaining a role entirely outside of politics, including in recent electoral crises. So there's a very complicated and perhaps not at all clear relationship between cause and effect in terms of U.S. military training and what's transpired on the ground. However, U.S. counterterrorism strategy that emphasized deeper and stronger military presence in northern Mali over the last few years did play a role as a strategy, and not in terms of training the military, but as a strategy did play a role in exacerbating the grievances of Tuareg separatists.
Yeah, well, in terms of military training, the French as well as their share, and I think it's not it's very common to find French military officers saying that what is the use to train people to as helicopter pilots and then to find them in the infantry afterwards. Or I could tell you so many stories about the way you train units and they are disbanded as soon as the training is over. Okay, and because this is a political issue, and especially under ATT, the former president, this was really has gone nowhere to the frustration of the French. To the extent, actually, though I'm not sure of that, but I heard several times that the French knew about a coup that wasn't the one of Sanogo, but they were so fed up with ATT and the collapse of the army that they just felt that let us close our eyes and so on. Now, now there is one country we will test is Chad, because if you look there, Chad announced about 2,000 soldiers getting to Mali. About half of them have been trained by the US on counterterrorism. So previously they have been used to fight the Chadian rebellions in 2006, 2008. There were a couple of hundreds at that time. The program went on, and so now there are around 1,000. Ethnically, they are mostly Zagawa and Boran, so people from northern Chad, of course. And so we will see whether they deliver. I think that's one thing even the US is willing to know. I hope that the collateral damages won't be as significant as they were elsewhere when the Chadians intervened. You talk about Rwanda, Burundi. Well, first the French policy towards those two countries have been very different actually. To make sure that people get confused, the relation with the Tutsi dominated Burundian army has been exceptionally good, while in Rwanda, as you know, it wasn't the case. So I don't want to go back about that just because, again, my point is because looking at François Hollande, what is interesting is this intervention took place basically at the same time as the intervention in Central African Republic. And what Hollande said about the intervention in that country was we go there to protect our citizens, not to protect the regime. And so that's not exactly the kind of neo-colonial. And basically, you know, we could say that the French military presence in Bangui avoided the capital to be taken by the rebels. Yes. On the other side, the capital city be taken by the rebels, you could have erased CR from the map because the last part of the economic sector is there, and if that is destroyed, I don't know what will happen to the population. Okay, so now about the African solution, I'm sorry, I don't see it. I'm an old blind person. What I see is Nigeria, where the army and the police, every time it intervenes, build Boko Haram stronger because of the number of people killed. What I see is Kenya, which I know very well. At the beginning, under Western advice, the Kenyan police and military were asked to be decent in front of the Muslim communities because they are not one community, Muslim community in Kenya, they are different. And what I see now at the period of the elections is blackmailing, extorting money, and putting in jail people just for the sake of getting bakshish. So really, is that the solution? I don't know, but just tell me.